their path to the pole. A scientist's quest, but with courage and sacrifice sealed. To strive and to seek and to find, but never to yield.
To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Those words from Tennyson somehow symbolize the whole heroic age of Antarctic exploration. They're inscribed on a simple wooden cross at Cape Armitage, with the names of Scott, Wilson, Bowers, Oates and Evans, the party who died on the return from the pole in 1912. If they saw all this now, they'd see very little change. There's no continent on Earth that's held man at arm's length for quite so long, or with such effect. Antarctica's still the same savage white wilderness that Captain Cook wrote off after his circumnavigation as a place of no material value to the human race. Today's science has uncovered a lot of Antarctica's secrets. A lot of its face has been mapped. Ocean approaches, channels, bays, anchorages, they've all been charted, but it looks no different. But there is one big difference. Men and women can come down here now to visit and enjoy a degree of comfort afloat that's almost an affront to the memory of yesteryear's hardships. The Lindblad Explorer is a little ship, 2,500 tons, with something of the atmosphere of a private yacht. People grow enormously fond of her, like a second home, but this informality of life aboard is in sharp contrast to the technical sophistication of her design. She was built from the keel up for just this sort of thing, to take a small number of passengers into the world's extreme places, in the tropical as well as the polar seas, and at the same time carry through her own full program of scientific recording. It's just the sort of operation that demands flexibility and endurance. She's a 6,000-mile range, full ice working capabilities, but above all, she's got an enthusiastic and resourceful set of officers and crew. 12 nations signed the Antarctic Treaty in Washington in 1959. In effect, it was a treaty of peace and scientific cooperation, an abandonment of all territorial claims, a treaty, in fact, that could be a lesson to the world. And down here, one can watch it all working. Coming ashore in the Zodiacs to the Chilean base on the Fildes Peninsula, at King George Island in the South Shetlands, almost a gateway into Antarctica. The Argentine flag is much in evidence, and so's the British. It's these two nations, with the New Zealanders over on the Ross Dependencies side, who do most to keep alive the tradition of dogs in the south. There are still jobs for the husky dog teams, despite the advance of snowcat vehicles. Why should efficiency always be God? And the practical voice of ultimate survival is always saying, very quietly, you can't eat a snowcat. The Russians say they're 17,900 kilometers from Moscow, and they're certainly on Moscow time at their Bellinghausen base, to link them perhaps with the folks at home, to be able to picture who'll be doing what and when. But their Chilean neighbors and guests, who live all but 100 yards away, are on Santiago time. But I suppose they can always pretend it's dinner, even if they're fairly sure it's breakfast. Antarctica's got few smells, but the halitosis of the southern elephant seal is certainly one of them. Odd, with a palate the colour of rose petals. They say that when God had finished making the animals, he had a lot of animal mixture left in a huge mixing vat. Tons of the stuff, and he decided to use it up, making a huge joke animal with a wobbly snout and about 20 feet long and weighing about 2 tons. But because God made love too, he knew that really ugly things were often best loved, and that's why you could never tire of inspecting elephant seals hauled out on the beach. The great mountains of irritable, wobbling, flaccid, steamy, malodorous meat, those sounds and smells of large caliber drains. Shredding skins, vast swimmy eyes that look like pools of navy rum. And it's a funny thing. In this sea of upturned faces, you'll always detect some elusive hint of memory. A distant relative, perhaps. A forgotten friend. Or was it oneself? A British naval officer, Edward Bransfield, was the first to chart the northern tip of Antarctica proper. It was in 1820. But in the same year, an interesting thing happened. American sealer captain Nathaniel Palmer in the Hero discovered Deception Island. It's a volcanic crater, still actively rumbling, sometimes even violent. On the chart you'll see an island shaped a bit like a horseshoe, with the ends nearly touching. And this small opening facing to the southeast, it's called Neptune's Bellows. Once discovered, Whalers Bay, which is just inside the Bellows, with excellent holding ground and shelter from every point of the compass, became a strategic whaling base. Even today, there's still the remains of a flourishing shore-based industry that survived until the heyday of pelagic whaling. Volcanic ash covers a lot of the discarded machinery now, but giant vertebrae of whales still litter the foreshore, and the seals have long since come back. Deception Island is a place of surprises. Volcanic fumaroles still persist. With a little care and a finger over the side of the Zodiac, you can find a place just right for a hot bath, or a warm swim. But these areas are very local, a yard or two to either side. You could just as easily be stewed as frozen. Whoever named this bay Paradise must have seen it on a day just like this. Much of the Lindblad Explorer's capability comes from her fleet of Zodiac landing craft. This sort of work is an eternal compromise, and there's no sort of boat quite so safe or quite so versatile for this job. They're quick over the side, quite easy to handle, and often in the water with the engine buzzing away before the anchor chains even run out. They're reasonably fast too, and fairly dry. In the pack and along the ice foot, they give this low, privileged view that makes you feel integrated with all you see, even if you do feel a little bit smaller. It's a good lesson in humility. The blue-eyed shag literally has the drop. Gen 2 penguins, the gentlest of them all, with their young. A white sheathbill there picking around, and Wilson storm petrels. St. Peter walked the waters, and so the name petrel. Taking the weight on the wings, they walk, catching up the tiny planktonic life of the surface, things you can hardly see, the beginnings of the ocean's food chain. Here there's a drifting life of unbelievable richness, nourishment to maintain one another all along the line according to size, and then on to the penguins and the seals and the giant fish and the largest of all the whales. But on the land, just a tiny specialized alga or two, a moss or a lichen, a mite. Life begins in earnest where Antarctica meets the sea. Inland, it's inert, almost sterile, with a past bounty enshrined in fossil rocks. But what of the landscape? Indescribable beauty and purity, intrinsic, moulded only by wind and weather and the growing pains of the earth. Porpoising penguins under the bow demonstrate the simple reaction of all these animals to the presence of man. a polite disinclination to alter the direction of their lives in any way or the private pressures of the moment. You could call it tameness. It comes to the same thing in the end. You can go close and watch them. Black and white, the Antarctic uniform, the penguin pattern, and the pattern of killer whales too. If whales provide the spectacle, then penguins are the crowd scenes. These ones are Adelies. They're the most penguin-like of all the penguins. Perhaps that's their greatest testimonial. They're quarrelsome, aggressive little things, with many more similarities to people than the vague overall suggestion of a waiter's convention. The more you look, the more you see it. Roger Peterson once said it's impossible not to be anthropomorphic about penguins, and it's true. You could pick them all out here. You can see the club bore, the sea lawyer, the absent-minded professor, and above all the spoilt child, who'll quite gladly see their harassed parents to an early grave with their insatiable demands for food. There's even the opportunist, the skier who elbows in, the pirate predator, the mortician, an uncompromising eye forever homing onto the main chance. Unforgettable days in rookeries, surrounded by the seething tempo of life, just to watch and to draw and explore with a pencil, learn their structure, find out more about the inexhaustible antics of penguins. One thing's certain about penguins. In the hurly-burly free-for-all of evolution, they've reached perfection in design for the underwater hunt, just as the albatross has done with flight. A visual inspiration, and a never-ending challenge to the taffrail photographer. But I'd guess Dominican gulls were easier to catch with a camera. Galley scraps from the Lindblad Explorer must be a true gastronomic breakthrough for a gull. Where's the most splendid scenery in Antarctica? Cape Hallett, some say. The Beardmore Glacier, Mount Erebus with her wave cloud, Paradise Bay. But they all mention the Lemaire Channel. At first sight, too narrow to navigate at all. And then inside, a feeling of the whole mountain massive of the Annapurna Himal, mirrored in a big sleepy lake. Cathedrals of ice carved from the great glaciers of Grahamland seem to reach a peak of size and variety around the Argentine islands. Grottos and giant mushrooms fringed with icicles. Evocative fluid forms and bridge spans that would delight any Henry Moore. One vast, endless parade of natural abstracts. Abstracts in reflected ice. Icescapes with little red ship. Abstracts composed of reflected light. Remoteness will always bring a sense of cooperation. Each voyage south, the Lindblad Explorer will complete some little extra task, something unscheduled, mail for the stations, return of scientists on leave or sick, delivery of urgently needed stores. This curious structure comes from the New Zealand Antarctic Society in the Canterbury Museum, to be erected at Cape Adare. Here on Ridley Beach, the Southern Cross expedition under Borchgrevink in 1899 became the very first party ever to winter over on the Antarctic continent. And these bronze plaques, engraved in 4 languages, tell of the event, and they now stand beside the original hut and the remains of another hut built by Scott's Northern Party in 1911. Some years from now, someone's going to land here again, maybe this ship, or a New Zealander, perhaps on the research program, or an American from McMurdo Base, and the plaque will be here for them to look at, just as we left it, standing in the middle of a swinging city of 500,000 inhabitants, none of whom can read. A Norwegian, Nikolai Hansen, was zoologist on that very first expedition, working on the ancestors of these very same penguins. He died here in his 20s of a vitamin deficiency at a time when dietetics were very little understood. He became the first man to die on this continent with any known grave. He's buried high up on Cape Adare. It was always his favourite view. It's not hard to see why. On down past Cape Hallett into the southern Ross Sea, the spiritual heart of this continent as well as its key. This is the course James Clark Ross took with the Erebus and the Terror, and every explorer since, aiming towards the pole. Here a ship can penetrate further than anywhere else to around 78 degrees south latitude in a good year. Ahead, 13,000-foot Mount Erebus with a gently steaming crater, the Ross ice shelf. The Bay of Whales, where Amundsen anchored the Fram for his successful dash to the pole. Antarctica is a land of statistics, and all of them seem to be superlatives. The highest of all the continents. 95% of the whole world's stock of permanent ice is here. The highest wind speeds and the lowest temperatures are recorded. So why would anyone want to go there, they asked. Can't you find somewhere a little more hospitable if you want to escape the English winter? It's a good question. A scientist would answer it easily, for field work. A painter, for inspiration. But there is in fact another, less specialist reason, a much more human one. Mankind has scarcely touched this land, yet those who did left behind an aura that no one can escape, something that can restore one's pride in the human race. It's an aura that can almost be physically felt in the historic huts at Cape Evans and Cape Royds. I believe that one day a continent's worth will be measured not just by mineral resources or strategic potential or population strength, but by its simple contribution to the spirit of man. Escape appeal, you could call it. In this field, Antarctica's got no equals. An area of totally inviolate wilderness twice the size of Europe, as big as the United States and Mexico together. It was once a brief footing for some of the most courageous men the world has ever known. But they, like us, were privileged visitors. No human being was ever born here.
Her beauty and whiteness beguiled the adventurer's soul. Endurance and hardship and death mark their paths to the pole. A scientist's quest, but with courage and sacrifice sealed, to strive and to seek and to find, but never to yield. Whales, seals and penguins, the natives that watch them go by, their dog teams, their sledges, their ships and their wings in the sky, saw the darkness of winter set in, and the men turn their backs, and the snows of Antarctica drifting to cover their tracks, and the snows of Antarctica